Hello, this is Jerry Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, jury acquits DC sandwich guy charged with chucking a sub at a federal agent from NBCNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for any federal agents or police officers or anyone doing the dirty work of the state. But personally, I don't think you should be throwing things at people. But if the courts want to acquit him, that's fine. But I know if Reddit, if it was a conservative guy throwing the sandwich, or now more out-group coded guy, could just go coded guy, I should say, rather than an in-group coded guy. Reddit would say this was a grave miscarriage of justice. But since it's an out-group guy going more after an in-group guy, Reddit thinks this is the greatest thing ever. And yeah, personally, if you want to throw shit at the cops or any legal enforcement, that just by doing whatever you want to, but I personally am not going to pretend that Reddit only cares about Reddit only cares about this because it suits its narratives. If the in-group and out-group designations were reversed, Reddit would think this is the worst thing ever, that he got away scot-free. And that's my wet thoughts on that issue. Next we have, confirmed ICE is arresting American citizens and lying about it, from NewRepublic.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I don't think ICE should be arresting American citizens, but ultimately, ICE has the ability to arrest whoever they feel like, just like pretty much every government official. That's ultimately why I think, if a police officer or any government official tries to arrest you, it's ultimately not legitimate, I would say, because, if anyone tries to arrest you, it's only because they have the monopoly of the legal monopoly of of the force bestowed on them by the state. If the cops want to arrest someone, that's fine. But just it's only because they have legal monopoly of the use of force by the state. If you were to go around arresting people, they'd be calling that false arrest. If you weren't a government worker or a federal agent, and went around arresting people, they'd be calling that false imprisonment, and you'd be arrested and jailed. But they can do it, and no one questions it. It's going to show you it's pirates and emperors. When an individual does something, it's illegal and it's piracy. But when the state does something, it's law and completely justified. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, IRS direct file won't be available until next year. Here's what that means for taxpayers, from APnews.com, posted by FlimsyOwl5563. And yeah, personally, I would say that the libertarian position is just get rid of the IRS entirely. But with that being said, since that doesn't seem at all realistic currently, I do think they should offer direct file. But with that being said, it's very much what taxpayers want to pay for. If the IRS doesn't have enough money to do direct file, then I guess you're not going to do it. But, personally, I think the libertarian position is just get rid of the IRS and the IRS in general. All taxation should be voluntary. And, I like how we live in a culture that revolves around consent, yet, that taxes are one thing that you have to pay to do unconsensually, and people justify it by saying, oh, you need taxes to support people, but ultimately taxation, like everything else, should be subject to the laws of consent, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, Senate Republicans vote down legislation to limit Trump's ability to attack Venezuela, from APnews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think Trump should just be able to attack Venezuelan boats or anywhere or any problem anywhere without congressional approval. But with that being said, even if he did have congressional approval, it just goes to show you that the government can bomb pretty much whoever it wants to, and attack whoever it wants to, and do pretty much whatever it wants to all the time. And oftentimes they won't be held accountable for it. I guess they were held accountable for it, maybe occasionally, but those examples are the exception rather than the norm. Meanwhile, if you ever attack a government agent, you're gonna, most of the time, face strict punishment, unless only a few exceptions, like that guy who threw the sandwich at the federal agent earlier. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, did these fuckers just wake up to their treasonous acts? Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the TikTok cringe subreddit. And it's Steve Bannon saying, if we lose the midterms and we lose 2028, some in this room are going to prison, myself included. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Bannon, but I don't think the government should be going after political opposition. And they did go after him, I think, during Biden's term. They made him even do a perp walk, I remember. And yeah, personally, I do think Trump's going after his opposition a little too much right now. But I would argue it was even worse during Biden's term. They were going after Trump. They were going after Trump. And personally, I think at this point, the only way out is through a national divorce. You gotta just dissolve the union. Our values are too different, and members of the in group and the out group just want to see each other arrested and thrown in jail for life. And it just goes to show you that people want to control other people and make everyone live according to their standards, and that's very much the opposite of what the libertarian beliefs are. Libertarian beliefs are, you do you, I do me. But these days, everyone wants to control everyone else, both on the left and on the right, and even then, a lot of that's just theater. What they really want is to control you. And both parties will enable the deep state, who's the one really running the country. The military-industrial complex, FBI, CIA, NSA, and the special interests like the Israel, like IPAC and the big business. They're the ones who will really run in the country. People like Trump, Biden, and the rest are just figureheads to distract people from the WWE like show. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, at this point, it's obvious the government has failed, and it's pretty much just a soap opera at this point, or a WWE wrestling stage show. And yeah, I think the libertarian position is you gotta just start recognizing it for the legitimate despots that they are. The government only has power because it's sociologically imagined. If everyone just decided one day that the government was illegitimate, it would be illegitimate. So ultimately it comes down to what people are willing to accept. And if I think the American people would do well to remember what the American people of 250 years or so ago did, and saying that the government's illegitimate and oppresses us, we're going to form our own government. I think that we should probably take out that. We should say, we're fed up with you, we're not going to take it anymore. If you want to rule over us using force, ultimately just by doing whatever you want to. But it's not right. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have more than 170 U.S. citizens have been held by immigration agents. They've been kicked, dragged, and detained for days, from ProPublica.org, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. As I said earlier, if the ICE was arresting U.S. agents, American citizens post, but ultimately the government can do whatever it wants to do, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it, as I've said for a lot of these posts. These guys were fine with the Biden administration doing whatever it wanted to, but the second Orange Man comes back into power, suddenly, they think it's the worst thing ever that the government can do whatever it wants, and that just goes to show you that, it's only just teams to a lot of people, nothing else. Next, we have disobeying the king's declaration that food is cheaper is grounds for legal system shakedowns, posted by CH for Locks, and that's a crosspost from the Blue Sky Skeets subreddit. The meat packing companies depended on migrant labor, shot himself in the foot. Now is a Blue Sky post from Aaron Report, who posted, Grandpa really might be cooked on this economy. If this is the best he's got, it's going to be a big momentum for Republicans. And that it's a screenshot of a truth from Donald J. Trump. I have asked the DOJ to immediately begin an investigation into the meat packing companies who are driving up the price of beef through illicit collusion, price fixing, and price manipulation. We will always protect our American ranchers, and they're being blamed for what is being done by majority foreign-owned meat packers who artificially inflate prices and jeopardize the security of our nation's food supply. Action must be taken immediately to protect consumers, combat illegal monopolies, and ensure these corporations are not criminally profiting at the expense of the American people. I am asking the DOJ to act expeditiously. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And yeah, personally, I think libertarian position on the meat industry should be, the government shouldn't have any role in it. It needs to be a truly free market like everything else. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Robbie Road streamer serenades Ice Goons with his unique rendition of YMCA, posted by DMBFFF. and that's looks like a YouTube video from Robbie Road streamer. Jeffrey Epstein giraffe returns to the ice in Portland after arrest. Robbie Road streamer. And yeah, personally, as I said, I don't think he should be going up to and trolling federal agents, especially if we say stuff like they're literally the Gestapo or the SS, they're that dangerous. But then, it's like people like him, like this guy say, oh, they're they're literally the Nazis, and then they just go up to them and troll them. It's like, if you really think they're that dangerous, you probably shouldn't be doing that. But like a lot of things, it's mostly just political theater. And that's pretty much all politics is at this point for pretty much everyone. It's theater. It's a distraction rather than focusing on who's really running the show. Next we have Oof. Hope you have a backup plan, Vivek. ETTT. Smiling face emoji. And that's posted by Ragnarok KXG, and that's cross-posted from the real Twitter account subreddit, and that's the truth from Donald Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy is running for the governor of the great state of Ohio, a place I love and won big 3 times in 2016, 2020, 2024. I know Vivek well, competed against him, and he's something special. He's young, strong, and smart. Vivek is also a very good person who truly loves our country. As your next governor, Vivek will fight tirelessly to grow the economy, cut taxes and regulations, promote Made in the USA, champion American energy dominance, keep our now very secure borders secure, stop migrant crime, strengthen our military veterans, ensure law and order, advance election integrity, and protect our always under siege Second Amendment. Vivek Ramaswamy will be a great governor of Ohio, and he is my complete and total endorsement. He will never let you down. And yeah, personally, I don't know if a Donald Trump endorsement is what a lot of politicians won't need right now, because it might actually hurt them rather than help them. But, I do think it's interesting. Reddit always goes on and on about how Trump is racist, yet here he is endorsing an Indian guy for governor of Ohio, and that just goes to show you that, Reddit will contradict its narrative if it feels like it, but they'll always go back to the same narratives, even if they post something that's a clear contradiction of it, like this. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, to preserve records, Homeland Security now relies on officials to take screenshots from nytimes.com posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, the Department of Homeland Security has stopped using software that automatically captures text messages and save trails of communication between officials, according to sworn court statements filed this week. And yeah, personally, I don't know. I do think the government should try and preserve as much digital records as possible. That being said, I personally don't, if they want to do screenshots rather than have automatically capture text messages and save trails of communication, ultimately the government can just try doing whatever it wants to. I think the libertarian position is, to do transparent, the government should be able to run itself whatever it feels like. And personally, I would care for more transparency. But if they don't want to be transparent, that's on them. I only hope that they don't use stuff like automatically capture text messages and save trails of communication for the peasants like us, who the NSA was caught spying on Americans over a decade ago. It's probably only gotten worse since then in regards to the records they're keeping of us. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, in LA, federal prosecutors are charging more protesters. A surprising number of cases are falling apart, from NBCNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, federal prosecutors in Los Angeles have taken a hard line against alleged violence at protests, charging nearly 100 protesters since June in cases that could result in long prison sentences, but a fifth of those cases have been dismissed or resulted in acquittals, in which some former federal prosecutors and free speech advocates say is a rare rebuke of the U.S. Attorney's Office's mission and credibility. And yeah, it's interesting, someone like Ninja Lover here was completely fine with them charging anyone and everyone remotely associated with January 6th, but then they start charging people associated with an in-group protest rather than an out-group protest, and suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And that's very much how Reddit works. If it's an in-group thing, Reddit, if they're going after the in-group, Reddit will think it's the worst thing ever, but if they're going after the out-group, they're just like Arthur Fleck. They're saying, oh, they get what they fucking deserve. And it just goes to show you, most people just only care about whether someone's in-group or out-group rather than they have any consistent values. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have conservative warning to judges. Get on board with Trump's agenda or get impeached. From AboveTheLaw.com, posted by CH4Locks.com, or CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the idea of judges as a whole. Why should ever people be able to judge others if it's like Christ says, judge not, yes, ye be judged. In my libertarian world, people should be taking the law into their own hands rather than have the courts handle it. But if the conservatives do want to threaten judges and say, oh, you need to get on board with Trump's agenda or get impeached, that's fine. But Reddit would say, if liberals said the same thing, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. But since conservatives are saying Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever, it's pretty much every post here at this point. Next, we have making my own AI camera to prove Flock's cameras are more than just license plate readers from YouTube. Posted by Hot Organization. That's cross-post from the or Ideology of Justice subreddit, and that looks like a YouTube video, link to YouTube video from KO, who make my own AI camera to prove Flock's cameras are more than just license plate readers. And yeah, personally, I don't think we should have government cameras on people. Let's say, oh, they're just license plate readers, but they're probably examining a lot more than that. They might be able to see to link you to like all your social media accounts and maybe just establish a social credit system. So if they ever see you post wrong in social media, they'll be able to use these cameras and to identify you and take away your license. But yeah, ultimately that's why I think we shouldn't have any cameras. If people want to have private cameras on their house, I think that's fine. But government cameras in the streets, I personally think that's a big no-no from a libertarian perspective. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump says he doesn't want to hear about affordability anymore. The president has given up pretending to care about skyrocketing cost of living from NewRepublic.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I think Trump should probably care about affordability because that's what the people most care about when it comes to their people vote for their wallets. But Reddit doesn't only cares that Trump doesn't care about affordability because he's a member of the outgroup. They were making excuses for Biden for years when it came to the inflation that occurred under his term. But suddenly Trump's back in power and they suddenly care about the economy again. It just goes to show you, they only care about the in-group over they only care about defending the in-group and attacking the out-group. Next, we have OpenAI floats the idea of government loan guarantees, posted by CH4Locks, and that's crossed from the investing subreddit. It's linked to the Business Times article, OpenAI seeks government backing to boost AI investments. And personally, I think the AI market, just like all the other markets, should be free market rather than a government influence market. So I don't think the government should be giving the AI companies any money. I think that should come from the free market. And yeah, personally, a lot of people, I'm kind of on the fence about AI. I think if people, it's a lot like guns. You can definitely misuse AI as a tool, but ultimately people are going to justify doing whatever they want, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have, will Democrats remember to limit federal power next time they are in power? Posted by Socialists or Morons, and they said, in light of the newfound skepticism of federal power among Democrats, will they learn from the Trump presidency and limit the power of the federal government, or will they abandon any skepticism towards federal authority the moment they gain power? And they posted a poll on it. Yes, they will reduce the power of the federal government. No, they will increase the power of the federal government, or at least keep it at the same level. And personally, I would say no. It's all just theater. The Democrats always like growing the government when they're in power, but when the Republicans are in power and keeping government roughly the same size or arguably even shrinking it, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. And it's interesting, Reddit, they're always like no kings, but they're also like hands off. Oh, my Social Security, Medicare, and all these other government run programs, and it just goes to show you they're hypocritical. They hate big government when it's an outgroup code like ICE or the CIA, but when it's in-group coded like Social Security, Medicare, then they suddenly love big government, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump approves pardon for former NYPD officer convicted in Chinese government scheme. Post from CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and then they added Trump is really standing up to China. And yeah, personally, I don't think Trump should be pardoning anyone involved in Chinese government schemes, especially since, anti-China is probably one of the biggest things. Being anti-Chinese government is probably one of the biggest things I'd agree with him on. But, just to show you, politics is mostly theater. They all serve the same masters, and even if Trump might mark himself as anti-China, he'll just bend over to freeing a former police officer convicted in a Chinese government scheme. And he's just controlled opposition. That's what he is. And even if and that's and it's just and even then the Democrats still freak out about him constantly. What would true opposition be like? True oppositions, the Democrats would be going absolutely ballistic and rather than controlled opposition. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, and then there's another post I want to share as well from the Libertarian Party USA subreddit that I posted, and it was former Capitol Police officer a forensic match for January 6th pipe bomber, sources say from the Blaze, and I posted that, and I said, what's the difference between a fact and conspiracy theory? Usually just a couple of months or years, and I linked to a post I made in the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. This was back before they banned me on January 25th, 2024. The FBI said there were pipe bombs on January 6th. Evidence points to a cover-up, Congressman says from dailywire.com. And yeah, just goes to show you that, a lot of so-called conspiracy theories are really just facts that haven't come out yet. And that's my thoughts on that issue. People, what we're calling Thomas Massey conspiracy theories, are saying that the pipe bombs were probably an inside job, and now it looks like those pipe bombs really were an inside job planted by a Capitol Police officer who might have been working for the CIA. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.